2006 as a professor of finance, and I recently joined the Division of Academic Affairs as the interim associate vice president, starting in January. Background in finance from Florida State University and engineering from University of Mississippi.
Good. Well, finance had a good year this year.
Yeah.
Legislative. So that's good. And I think that's the only other person that's new to us. Jody, I know we've seen and heard from you before. So let's go ahead for approval of the minutes. Any corrections to the minutes? Could I have a motion to approve?
So move.
And second with Joe.
Yep.
Joe. Thank you. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, moving right along, I'm going to turn it over to Lee Towers is on our line. Lee, go ahead with a little bit of a legislative wrap up and we'll take questions too with that.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I only have two things that I think should be brought to everyone's attention. Number one, good news. The funding for ARCSIS was included in supplemental number 4. So that was $1 million. And there was one bill that I think is going to be a bit of a challenge for some that it has a very short timeline. It's for the public institutions. That's House Bill 966. It's the academic credit for prior learning examinations. It requires each institution on or before October 1, 2022 to develop and implement policies and procedures for awarding academic credit for prior learning examinations and posting them on the website and submitting them to MHEC so that we can post them on our website. In addition, it has a December 31st due date for some metrics to be reported to MHEC and to the General Assembly, not just to us this year. It also requires MHEC to develop regulations to carry this out. And it will allow us to, the Commission or the General Assembly, to request any other information as well. This bill is effective July 1st this year. I just thought that it would be worth noting for the nexus of SAC. That's really the only two items I had.
Okay,
Secretary?
Joe, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we worked with the sponsor of this bill to make sure that the language was very clear, that it was with regard to examinations and not prior learning assessment in general. The way the bill was originally dropped, it could have been much more sweeping. So we worked with Delegate Solomon, and he was able to, he understood where we were coming from. So I think all of our campuses have been pretty clear and consistent in their acceptance of prior learning assessment by examinations. It's a matter of gathering the data now.
Emily?
Yeah, just for everyone's awareness, we will likely do a similar exercise that we did with the transfer regulations. The regulations on credit for prior learning are, again, fairly old. They conflate competency-based education with credit for prior learning. So it's not as big of a cleanup, but we do need to do some cleanup with it. And so expect an email from me in the next week or two, reconvening the group that did the report. We'll just kind of lean on the people who did the report. I'll certainly keep Segmental leadership involved and copy you on that original email, but we'll reconvene a work group to make those changes, align with the requirements of the law, particularly around AP credit. And I think it's CLEP. They also set the standard. We're going to have to think that I think the heavy lift is figuring out under what circumstances, particularly for the AP acceptance of a 3, will say, no, you can require something higher. So we can talk about that offline, but I think that's going to be the heavy lift is the exemption carve out that's in the bill. So stay tuned for more, but we're going to move fairly quickly on that and try to get that up and going so we have regulations to review over the summer.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see that Dr. Yu has just joined from Morgan. Dr. Byrd?
Yeah, quick question. So the bill requires for AP credit a 3 or better, right? Unless you ask for an exemption and can show that needed. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
any other questions or discussion on this?
Can I ask a question? Emily, would it be okay if we were included in this? I know that we are not impacted by it, but just in case it is so brilliant and it starts to include us, it would be great. Thank you.
No,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Can I also go back to the ARTSIS question, the ARTSIS funding, just for a quick minute?
Sure.
And I might need to ask Joe and Tony this separately, but it jogged my memory. Do we need a bill to do what needs to be done with ARTSIS, or are we okay with okay, I see Tony saying no. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because if we did need a bill, I was going to suggest that we get in front of it this year rather than play catch up. Thank you, Tony. Okay.
Oh, I thought you were asking if you could have a bill from the system as in an invoice. I'm just teasing, Sarah, just teasing.
No, thank you. But yes, thank you. And
Okay,
congratulations to everyone who worked on that bill. Really appreciative. I'm really excited and looking forward to having it up and running.
yes, I would also congratulate everyone as we move through the legislative session. It was done with a lot of people working together. Also stopping some of the things that we didn't need to see and encouraging others and supporting others that we really did need. So I really appreciate that. So thank you. Any other questions for Lee? If not, we'll move on to Donna, financial aid report.
Good morning, everyone. Donna Thomas here with OSFA, Office of Student Financial Assistance. Today, I wanted to provide updates to the Segmental Advisory Council, particularly with the certification process. What I'm referring to is the certification process that financial aid officers must complete each term in order to certify the student's eligibility. We continue to have institutions that fail to complete the certification process by the deadlines that we are establishing. That is a major impact, particularly in our largest need-based aid program, the Howard P. Rawlings Educational Excellence Awards program. The reason why is because in that program each year, we over-award. And we over-award in the program to make as many awards as possible to students in order to make sure that we fully spend the annual allocation. However, we run into situations where institutions fail to complete that certification process by the deadline, and it results in us getting in a situation towards this time of year where the institutions finally are cleaning up those rosters after the deadline date, where we wind up closing with funds that could have been spent on the wait list because we did not know early on in the year that those awards would be canceled because the student is not enrolled or they're not enrolled full time. To give you an idea, MHEC set a deadline of March the 15th for the spring 2022 term. And after March the 15th, we had more than $13.3 million pending in certifications across the board in institutions, just in the Howard P. Rawlings Educational Excellence Awards program. We do understand that some of the institutions are unable to certify funds because they have those mini-mesters where the student is not full-time until the start of that mini-mester, which may be after that March 15th deadline. We are aware of that, we recognize that, and we do work with institutions. However, a lot of those certifications that were outstanding were not a result of those individuals enrolling in those mini-mesters. So I wanted to bring this up to the Segmental Advisory Council so that way collectively we can continue to improve in this area, because it is our goal at Impact to make sure that we can hit the waiting list as much or as many times as possible to expend all funds in the program. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Donna, I'm sorry that I don't know this, but when the institution doesn't hit the deadline, what is the next step? Do you just wait and hope, or do you communicate with them in some way? And so I'm just trying to figure out what role, if any, we could play here.
Absolutely. So what we do is right after the deadline, we follow up and we send a memo to that particular /email to that particular financial aid office. In that particular email, we inform them the dollar amount that is outstanding by program, and we set a new deadline date, which is a very tight window for them to go in and pretty much clean up. Some of them will reach out to us if they have any type of challenges on their end. They'll reach out to us and let us know what's holding them up or so forth. But we would appreciate that communication early on versus after, you know, the deadline has passed. So it has to be that continued communication, because on this end, we don't know what's holding up that certification. And again, a lot of them not completing certifications is not due to those mini masters. And so if there is a situation that's happening in the financial aid office that's preventing them from certifying, we have to be aware, because we want to utilize those funds. We don't want to have to close and transfer money into the need-based fund at the end of the year.
Any other questions? I would, Joe, go ahead.
Actually, I think Tony may have a comment from our financial aid directors. Dr. Coleman?
Hi, Donna. How are you?
Okay.
Good. There's been an ongoing discussion, I think, in the Financial Aid Advisory Council about the date for some of our institutions to complete the process in awarding the financial aid packages, to students to see. Has the Financial Aid Advisory Council discussed that at any great length in relationship to the MHEC deadline and what their campuses are experiencing? Because a lot of the probably not meeting the certification time is the packaging that they need to do on their end when students are finally getting their information in. Have you guys been drilling down on that timing? Because in 2019, before the pandemic, we had USM institutions an in-depth conversation about what the deadline for this is in April and the turnaround time. Have they been addressing that at all in the FAC meetings?
That has not been a topic of discussion recently, but it will be on the upcoming agenda for the council to discuss. Some of the things that we're noticing is that in the spring term, the state award should have already been a part of the student's package if they have already accepted it. So we understand in the fall semester that there may be delays with the institutions getting those applied, but we're noticing that when it comes time for the spring semester, unless they just started in the spring for that time of year, at the start of that year, that may be some challenges for the school to have to add it to their package. But we're noticing we get to the spring and there's just a significant amount outstanding. And for it to be so late in the year where we're approaching April, literally a month remaining or a month and a half remaining in that semester, most of those certifications should have already been completed. So hopefully with that discussion taking place in the next meeting and even in future meetings, we definitely collectively can come up with a plan to resolve this.
Yes, because what has been the ongoing problem is they have a federal date that they have to meet, and you know what date that is, and the turnaround time that they have to get information into you. It seems like the federal date is like in April, and they're pushing, or before they're pushing, these two dates just don't seem to work for our financial aid directors. So I know you have Patricia on, and you have Marcus Bird, and Tracy is the USM. What I will ask them to do, and if that's an issue with any of the other segments, I know it was with the community colleges too, to outline when these dates aren't really working, especially if they have a lot of students to package in the spring. That's important, especially for those students who may be applying for the fall that they're dealing with in the spring. So they're not really waiting until the fall to do with them. They're trying to meet that March deadline that you have for incoming students who are applying for the grants. So it's not just the returning students they're confronted with. So I'll get them to outline that for you and bring that to the meeting so you'll know exactly where the pothole is for them.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, before we leave this, MHEC, as you know, for those who heard some of the hearings, was taking some of the heat about the OSFA and the dates, the deadlines, and the complaints that the legislators receive, and we've shielded institutions from that. However, I think our willingness to continue to shield institutions that have not met the deadlines has faded. So going forward, we expect to have the accountability that everyone expects of each of us. So, okay, anything else on this before we move on? Okay,
That
Emily,
is the only update on my end, Secretary. And if I could just have one last comment, I just wanted to share that the majority of those certifications are in the Educational Assistance Grant Program. So just, please keep that in mind, that the largest dollar amount that's outstanding is in the Educational Assistance Grant Program, where we're seeing the significant amount of students remaining past the deadline. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you. Okay, well, also, I know we heard in the legislative session a number of questions about what are we doing about declining enrollment. So we wanted to have a little bit of discussion. Emily, if you would go ahead and share your screen. I think you have it.
Yeah, sure. So I just put in the chat, it's a link to one of our new dashboards. It's the opening fall enrollment dashboard. Let me just share my screen real quick. Just so I think we all know, but just so you know that these dashboards exist now as interactive tools. So you're aware of how to navigate them. There's this button at the bottom that clicks to different slides. But this particular slide shows fall enrollment by segment. And you can also just do it undergrad full-time, and you'll see the changes, undergrad part-time. So you're seeing just the general decline, particularly at undergrad level. The interesting thing to note, and this was presented at our commission meeting a couple months ago, is we are seeing increases from between last year and this year in graduate programs. But nonetheless, the point is we are seeing some trends. How much of it is it attributable to COVID? That's kind of time will tell. How much of it is kind of foreshadowing of a larger decline that's predicted by 2025. So I'll stop presenting, but like Secretary Fielder said, we thought we would open that up for discussion and see what we need to do as a state in terms of messaging, recruitment, what this all means.
Well, I think that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I did not quite see all the data. You moved so quickly, I just couldn't catch up with you. So I don't know. Is there anybody else who want to see the better than I?
Emily, I went to the link, but I didn't see your graphics. Are those on the? Oh, perfect. Thank you.
So the top blue one is the undergraduate?
The blue is the community colleges. There's the scale at the bottom. The blue is community colleges, which shows the continuing decrease for the last 10 years. The public 4 years are in the purple, and the state aided are in orange.
Oh, okay.
I started to say at the bottom, and that didn't sound right. So, or in orange. So we got a significant amount of questioning about what are we doing at the community colleges, knowing that just a few years ago, $15 million was funded specifically to start the Promise program, and that has not alleviated the decline, even though there are local Promise programs. So we thought we'd better start bringing this up for conversation, even though it does reflect national trends. What is the state of Maryland intending to do to try to do either more outreach, branding efforts? We've seen a lot of title changes coming in from institutions to try to make their academic programs more marketable. All those kinds of things are already occurring, but what else should we be doing? And I think it's across the whole higher education sector.
Yeah, well, as you know, this is a national trend, and it actually started a little bit before COVID.
Yes.
In all fairness, COVID kind of emphasized it. And remember at the time when COVID first hit, and we really thought that more people would be going to their local area community college rather than taking a chance on going to the dormitories that they would be staying in at the four-year publics and the private institutions. But it certainly didn't come out that way. There's been a lot of national work done in this, and our presidents are going to be taking it up as one of their major initiatives to address. Exactly what we're going to be doing, I really can't report at this time, but any help that we did see that, and we were really pleased that MHEC ended up with, them doubling their outreach funds for such initiatives, and we're hoping to work closely with you all in addressing this.
And like you said, it is a broader
the
issue.
yellow, the one on the bottom, the state assisted actually increasing.
Is this one graduate, Emily?
So this is all, and part of that increase in the state assisted is actually the graduate. It's being driven by graduate enrollment. So what you're seeing right here is all enrollment, undergraduate, graduate, part-time, and full-time. So it's everybody. But yes, Sarah, to your point, it's for the state aided independent, that increase is driven by graduate enrollment primarily.
Well, there's an incredible amount of competition now with short-term training programs, not only at the four-year institutions, but certainly at the private career schools and also independent tech companies like the Googles and the Amazons of the world are doing their own training programs for short-term training. And so it's become a kind of a different world for undergraduate degrees in a lot of ways.
Yes, and then also the recent announcement about the Maryland jobs that are 1,100 jobs now that you don't have to have an undergraduate degree. What impact is that going to have on higher ed? Joe, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that we do have a Regents enrollment work group going, and each one of our institutions are reporting to that work group about their enrollment strategies, including recruitment of some college no degree and some that are actually more traditional than non-traditional older individuals, getting them into the four-year institutions. I was pointing out that the numbers on the purple line went from 179,000 to 174,000, and the biggest chunk of that was actually at UMGC in our system that has a mixture of reasons that their enrollment dropped. But in fact, we think that we're going to be able to recover some of that with enhanced outreach and especially to adult populations. But I would reiterate what Jody was saying with competition with private industry and so on, and specific certificate programs that industries can actually give. We're working with industries to see if, in fact, we can't work together a little bit better. But I just wanted you to know that, in fact, the Regents really are doubling down on understanding the reasons for this.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Thank you. And I know at Morgan, they reported an increase in your fall enrollment, one of your biggest classes ever. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, we did. The freshmen, we continue to have an increase in requests for this year.
Sarah, I think you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quick give all of you a heads up that thank you so much for putting this on the agenda, Mr. Secretary and Emily. We received a media inquiry about this, and so I don't know if the rest of you have as well, but Mick was in a situation where some of our institutions, just like some of the other schools on this call, Morgan, it sounds like too, have had some of the largest fall classes ever, and some of our institutions have not. And so sector-wide, we're trying to figure out how to respond to this situation. But I also wanted to make sure that we were talking about it as a higher ed community. So I really appreciate having the conversation on the agenda today, and perhaps we could put it back on the agenda. No, Emily, you thought it might be a little early to kind of address some of these things, but if we could just keep talking about it, I think it would be helpful.
Well, I think, you bring up a good point, Jody, you brought up a good point about, kind of our private career schools. We have seen a number of new applications for private career schools with intent for some pretty heavy duty enrollment. And then some private career schools that have requested increased enrollment, right? So we kind of cap their enrollment based on faculty and space and all sorts of information. So I can try to gather that as well, so that you all have some of that information for context in the grand scheme of what post-secondary education looks like in Maryland and what kind of the other half of our agency has been doing. The other thing that I'll add is we do have drafted in the state plan, I know this lovely state plan that is supposed to exist right now, but we do have drafted, particularly under innovation and student success, this idea that campuses could be looking towards certificates and other training opportunities that are both reskilling individuals and upskilling them. And I think that that came from one of the writing groups, that may be the focus and the new energy in the 2020 decade that we live in, and can certainly start talking about that and thinking about ways how our state agency can help with that, and identifying industry needs that are those short-term credentials, not necessarily full-fledged degrees, but give those reskilling or upskilling opportunities for individuals to expand their knowledge and skill base. So we do have that in the state plan as a focus of program development.
And to Jody's earlier point, I think it's instructive to see the ads that we see all the time, whether TV, news, networks, in terms of the short-term certificates, apprenticeship programs. Why pay $10,000 per year for a degree when you can, in 6 months, be making $90,000 as a coder, as a cybersecurity person? And those things are real. The problem is there's no data on it. There's no way for it to be measured to see whether we have the transference of the students that were previously at a community college or four-year now simply going into that degree, and the short-term credential, is it going to be a stepping stone back into the traditional higher eds? And we don't know those things, and that's a national question. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on how we might go about trying to collect that information. I mean, for now, we just know they're growing in the fields.
Well, and Secretary Fielder, I do know MLDS is making an effort to identify those licensing credentials and figuring out how to collect that information for the purposes of workforce analysis. So there is that, but that's again a slow burn in trying to identify the right partners. I think right now they're working with Microsoft on some of their training tools and their training licenses. So again, slow burn, but opportunity there. But yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of these discussions like the enrollment decline. It's to be continued. There's no quick answer. Joe, go ahead.
I will tell you that in working with the Greater Washington Partnership, they had two levels of computerized certificates. One was a generalist certificate and one was a specialist certificate. We've worked out with them, and in fact, we are giving the generalist certificate that they are recognizing and so on. We worked out all of the content there. Interestingly, the specialist certificate, the requirements they had in that certificate mapped almost exactly with our bachelor's degree requirements. So in fact, we didn't go further about talking about doing their certificate versus our bachelor's degrees. But if you got your bachelor's degree, you would have had all of those skills. But I just wanted you all to know that we have been in deep discussions with them, but that was the outcome.
And Joe, just quick, did they share with you the costs of what those certificates or specialist certificates are, and how do they compare in terms of timelines to a degree?
I was not in the specialist certificate conversation, so I don't know, but I can find out for you, Secretary.
It's just of interest, you know.
I don't
Jody?
want to be flippant about this, Dr. Bauman, but couldn't that be focused into credit for prior learning, right? Into the whole discussion that we're going down that line, the credits for prior learning for the certificate.
Absolutely. That's, you know, it gets very complicated very quickly.
Yeah.
About whether you are going to accept certain skills and so on. But the exercise of mapping their requirements to our degree requirements was a really interesting process.
It sounds like you almost said transfer 70% in that line. Okay, any more discussion? Like I said, we'll follow up, and I appreciate Joe and everyone the insight you've provided so far. So this is one we need to keep on our docket and watch it as it moves along. The implications for us, of course, are directly funding FTE achievement, achieving the 55% goal. So that's a metric that's out there. Anything on this? Let's move forward. In our state plan, as you know, in the last 4 years, we've talked about student access, success, and innovation. And as we continue to look at the innovation side and through the academic side here, have had meetings with NSA and others to talk about what's needed in 5 and 10 years out. And it all centers around a tremendous amount of discussion about computer science and the need for increasing cyber security, all those support systems. So that has continued. So we've taken as part of the state plan, let's look at changing it to access and success through innovation. And what is the need to expand the core general ed requirement, well, not requirements, but approval process and review that we're looking at in terms of lots of discussions over the last 5 years about the need for increased financial literacy. So some of those things, and Emily, you want to spend a couple of minutes where we're headed with this?
Sure. So as you may be aware, we, in our regulations, we obviously do a duplication analysis. However, that duplication analysis kind of gets set aside when it's for, and this is a quote, core undergraduate liberal arts and science programs. So of course you can think about, your English, your traditional history, psychology could even fit under there. We are considering, and we would like to present this to our commissioners as a policy statement, that we would, generally speaking, some exceptions, allow computer science to be considered a core liberal arts and science program at the undergraduate level. That in practice, what that means, again, by and large, this isn't a blanket. There would be some exceptions, and we'd still do a duplication analysis. But by and large, every college should have an undergraduate degree in computer science, and that we wouldn't be stepping on each other's toes. Computer literacy is an important 21st century skill. Allowing every institution a computer science or a type of computer science, cybersecurity program would attract students to Maryland. When we have NSA in our backyard, it helps students to stay in Maryland, and kind of puts Maryland at the forefront in talking about computer science largely and particularly cybersecurity. So we wanted to bring this to your attention, give you a minute to think about it. Like I said, we'd like to be able to present this as a policy statement to our commissioners that would say, that we are, generally speaking, recognizing computer science undergraduate degrees as core liberal arts and science programs, again, at the undergraduate level.
Sarah, the short answer for me would be immediately. I think it's a high enough priority for the state's economy. It's a high enough priority for the legislature that have passed different scholarships and requiring, adding cybersecurity and other things. So I would be tempted to say that we would be prepared to present this at our commission later this month.
Your meetings, is it this week or next week? Next week. So about a week and a half. Okay.
Yes. I think that, when we were taking a look at what the Carnegie classifications have done, some of those things have occurred. From what we have been able to research, we have not found that a single state has made this declaration. So we would be the first state that actually moves toward this. We do know that there's some individual institutions that have, needless to say, done this automatically. But we wanted to bring it before you to get your input.
Dr. Yu?
Yeah, let me just clarify the question, what we're discussing, is to allow any college to offer undergraduate computer science degree, right? Yeah, great idea.
Essentially.
So what about on a graduate level? Any consideration for that?
No, we would want to do a much more in-depth analysis at the graduate level. But at least at the undergraduate level, allowing institutions that flexibility and that openness.
Great.
Joe, go ahead, please.
We've had several discussions from time to time saying if everybody offered this, we still couldn't supply enough folks. So I think that's my comment at this point in time, but we can get more information directly about considering it core. That might make some of the discussion and points to be made in a new program offering. They may have to, articulate things a little bit differently. But one of the things that I would hope MHIC would consider doing as you move forward with this is to use whatever leverage you have to help those companies, institutions, whether it's NSA and other organizations or other, as I say, private sector companies, to offer more internships, especially paid internships, because that will be a major stumbling block for some students who are financially strapped and so on. So if in fact the entire higher education community came together to put pressure on these organizations, that would help tremendously in student success and in diversifying the workforce in that area, I would think.
No, that's a very good point. We've talked a little bit internally about the term apprenticeship programs too, and work study programs. As you know, when I was in Michigan, those work study programs are absolutely integrated and are part of the academic program. It's not like the student goes out and does it on their own to get credit for it. It's part of their academic program, typically in the engineering side, but I think there's been a growth, of course, into the computer science side. And with all the contractors and research and development monies, billions spent in Maryland, I think that's a really good opportunity to say that let's couple this together. Any other thoughts on this? Because I'd like to move this forward quickly. I just think it's an important thing for us to do, again, to try to lean into this and provide some leadership versus waiting to respond to the cries of we don't have enough graduates and we have to go out of state.
I do want to just let my presidents know, Mr. Secretary, before I don't want my silence to be interpreted as everything's good. I appreciate the conversation. Just if you could just give me a day, I just want to double check that. Thank you.
Sure. Dr. Bird, I didn't hear from you from St. Mary's, and Jody.
We have a computer science program and a major, so I don't think we'd have a problem with it.
Okay. And Dr. Yu?
Just a quick question about the cybersecurity. You mentioned along with computer science, you mentioned cybersecurity. What's the take on the cybersecurity? I don't know. I don't think everybody has cybersecurity. Only a few schools have cybersecurity. What is the MHEC's view on that?
So cybersecurity would be lumped into this. So it would be computer science and specifically cybersecurity as a subdomain. Obviously, there are lots of other subdomains of computer science, which is why we want to still be able to continue doing the duplication analysis for some of those specialty areas. But the kind of global statement would be computer science, cybersecurity are programs that every undergraduate institution should have the opportunity to offer to students, generally speaking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something in here because a lot of people aren't very aware of the number of cybersecurity and computer science programs that the community colleges offer.
Yes.
And they've been extensive because of they've been developed under a federal program. And I think all 16, I do know at least 15 of the 16 colleges have very healthy science. So as you develop those programs, I do hope that you'll work with transfer programs at the community colleges. I don't know exactly how to put us in there.
No, I think that's a very good point, Jody, because as you know, several years ago, we went ahead and tried to put together a template for use as an articulation program. And to me, when I start hearing this conversation right now, it seems to me that could very easily work out for not just the community colleges, but as Joe talked about, some of these private, actually work through and come up with an articulation program that's from a private training facility into a degree, associate's certificate, or bachelor's degree. And we'd be willing to work and support that too. I think it's a tremendous message to send to our citizens.
And would this be done by regulation, or it doesn't need to be through regulation?
We've had our assistant AGs take a look at it, and there's no change in regulations or COMAR. This is a simply policy guideline is the easiest way to say it. If you were saying it's an IRS code, it's a broadening of the definitions.
Mm-hmm. This also, we could, kind of think forward and use this as a way to attract students to Maryland, to say, you're going to, no matter where you go in Maryland, you're going to have some exposure potentially to computer science, and could help differentiate Maryland from other states. Separate from this, there have been just kind of ongoing conversations, not only internally, but externally, looking at our gen ed requirements. And another element to this is potentially adding computer literacy as a gen ed. It's a separate issue, something that we would want to pull together far more stakeholders, because that would be a regulatory change. But that could be another piece to this in terms of, again, bringing our students into a 21st century skill set.
Can I ask another question? And I don't know, this is only tangentially related, so I don't want to.
Go ahead.
Okay, so is there a process for, because I'm thinking to some of my schools and their programs, their undergraduate programs, is there a process for also expanding, for instance, the science curriculum to include other health sciences, or the history curriculum to include other social sciences, political sciences, things that students are also interested in. I totally get the pressing need for computer science, but I'm coming on this cold and it sounds like I'm only going to have a day to talk to my presidents about it. So I just want to understand what the process is by which you decide this. And then going forward, if we wanted to propose other changes like this, what that would look like.
I think that's a very good and very fair question. And this developed as we started continuing to work on our state plan. How's this going to be any different unless we don't change something? The gen ed requirements and what has happened in the past is exactly that. It's past, it's history. The workforce changed, and the jobs that are needed in the future are changing, as each of us know, dramatically. So we need to be leading into that. We simply don't have enough allied health professionals, and the professions themselves are changing rapidly. So if we don't address it, and this is an example of how we're going to try to address it. So yes, we should be reviewing all those programs and saying, where do we need to be expanding? Where can we be more innovative? Where can we be more open and inviting to students that they want to be here? They don't want to go out of state. Can it help us with declining enrollment? It could help some, but the bottom line is, what are we doing for the future economy needs?
Secretary, if I could add, I think Sarah, just making a proposal to us, I think would be helpful, and a justification, and then give us meat to work with, and then certainly we consider it internally and bring it to the commissioners and think through that. So I think it's an informal, formal process.
Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
We already have computer literacy in our gen ed requirements, so that's not a problem. We would want to look, and thanks to Tony for feeding me this information via text while we're doing this. We need to focus on computer technologies, if you will, the technological aspect, and not just general literacy. But this also fits, I would say, with the hard work the Maryland Center on Computing Education that sits in our office has been doing, so that now at least every high school in the state has somebody who's qualified to teach computer computer education writ large, I guess I would say, so that more students are coming to us with some understanding, at least those recent graduates from high school. But we'll look at whatever you all have, and maybe we'll share some of our information on how it is in our gen ed requirements and so on, especially Salisbury, since they are redoing all of their gen ed requirements and the way they're organized.
Good, that sounds good. Any more on this? I know we skipped over the workplace and higher ed. Emily, we've kind of blended the last two conversations together on this. So Emily, anything specific?
No, I realized we've not really, as a segmental group, had a chance to talk about the governor's announcement around many state jobs having the elimination of a bachelor's degree. I think I just want to share kind of just my own personal experience hiring within a state agency and DBM's rules and requirements. If you've ever gone through the state hiring process, it can be bureaucratic. I say that neutrally, not in a good way, not in a bad way, but bureaucratic. There are very specific classifications for jobs. They have thousands and thousands of different types of classifications, and every job has a classification and certain education requirements and certain experience requirements. And I can speak from my own experience in hiring. We've been challenged because they are such high standards for hiring certain individuals. And even to the point where some of our classifications require a PhD, when really you could do the job without a PhD. So my impression of all of this is that DBM did a kind of full review of these classifications, realized that a bachelor's degree was probably too high of a standard and was leaving some people out of the potential pool of individuals that could qualify. And so they did a reevaluation of some of these classes. I know several of our classifications got readjusted for experience and education requirements. So wanted to share that this is my personal experience. I realize this is a recorded meeting and it's going live. This is my personal experience. This is not a devaluing of the bachelor's degree, but really a better realignment and assessment of state jobs and what is required to do those state jobs, so that qualified individuals could be listed as best qualified in the absence of certain degree or education requirements.
Yep. Sarah, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. So Emily, I really appreciate you saying that. That was not in, I don't think, the headlines or the story. And so I think that's really helpful. I'm wondering if we as higher ed could respond in some way that just acknowledges that this will be very helpful with workforce and vacancies and getting people into the right job for them, but that there is still value in a bachelor's degree. I mean, to Joe's point about, it's the same kind of skills, it's just rebranding, repackaging. I'm not a marketing professional, but I wonder if there's some room for MHEC or the segments to talk about, great job, Governor Hogan. There are also all these other jobs and positions available if you are highly skilled, and here's how you apply for them, so that it's a more balanced kind of message. That's what I would hope could happen.
Okay, and thank you. Anyone else on that? Well, I can certainly echo what Emily was saying, and we have a list that come back from HR of the number of applicants, and they go best qualified and even better qualified, these different things.
Yep.
And you read through the resumes and going, what? So it's difficult to try to sort through and do a really appropriate job for everyone that wants to be interviewed. I mean, when you get a list back of 35 people that are best qualified, and I don't know how many you do at the institutional level, but I know with private sector, you don't bring in 35 candidates and interview 35 candidates. But part of the guidelines are you can't move to the next step until you've interviewed all 35. So it's cumbersome, it's antiquated also. So we need to come up with ways, and I think that the intent of the governor's office, of course, was to trying to broaden the applicant pool, which it has. So I'm hopeful that does move some things along. But Sarah, that's a good point. We'll take a look at that. Okay, Emily, anything else?
Not on that front, but I do have a couple of other things. But I'll wait.
Ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead. We're at that point.
Yep, I just wanted to share with everybody a meeting or two ago, I had shared a potential calendar of reporting requirements. I'm just waiting on the JCR reports to come through, so plan for June. If I can get that out and done before our June meeting, I will certainly share that with you so that you'll just have a better sense. It will be an all-expansive calendar, and it will just be really only for academic affairs kind of reports, not the finance stuff that goes to Jeff, not the regular ongoing data that goes to your IR folks. These are kind of these meaty, kind of weird reports. And it will be all expansive. So it'll have a column that says this applies to every institution. This only applies to community colleges. This only applies to public. So you'll have to do a little bit of sorting, but it'll all be there, and with dates and expectations moving forward. So know that we're working on that. I'm waiting on the JCR to come out before we finalize that.
Okay.
The other thing, I just want to go back to the credit for prior learning. Dr. Bird, you had said, I just want to be clear what the law requires. It requires a minimum score of 3 on advanced placement examination. The carve-out says that policies and procedures may require a higher score if the chief academic officer provides evidence to the commission that the higher score is necessary for a student to be successful. So we're going to have to work through what does it mean to provide evidence. So a minimum score is required. So everybody has to have a 3. If your institution wants higher than that, we're going to have to figure out the rules of how we allow higher.
3 out of 5? I did not hear it. 3 out of 5?
Yeah, everybody has to accept a 3 on all AP exams starting July 1st with policies in place by October 1st. Dr.
Go
Bird.
ahead, Dr. Bird.
Thanks, Emily. I have the bill up because that's it. When I saw it recently, that was the question. How soon are we going to get what that requirement is, so that, because the turnaround is fairly short for us that actually have a requirement of 4, but to know exactly what we have to provide, that has to be pretty soon.
Yeah. So expect an email from me in the next week or 2, setting up our first meeting to get everybody together and talk. We'll do a similar exercise that we did with transfer, and make sure we have stakeholder input, and then we'll put forth regulations to make that all happen.
Emily, was there any key lead on the legislative intent of this language that needs to be included?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I think it was just standardizing. My impression is it really is about the AP exams. CLEP, IB, and Cambridge kind of got added on as kind of other universal, nationally accepted, standardized experiences that happen at the undergrad level. But yeah, I think this is primarily driven by the advanced placement exams that are given in high school.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bachman. I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Emily. I'd like to go back to your comprehensive list of reports and request, Mr. Secretary, that we once again consider for next year's General Assembly requesting that the DEI reports be given every other year instead of every year. I know what you all must receive, because what we receive is about 175 pages worth that we have to summarize. And the things just don't change that fast, so that in fact, it would be a great help to us. And we think a reasonable ask to have the statute changed to have that be every other year. But we keep missing the deadline to put it on the legislative agenda.
Well, Joe, one of the things we've started internally is to start to take a look at all the different reports that we do from all things and say, why can't we just go even out of session to the legislature and say, can't we change the dates? Can't we change the how many times do we need to submit it and when? So we're going to be handling that, and we'll make sure that everyone knows which reports we're trying to change.
Okay, well, some of them are, they started as JCR reports. On the DEI, it actually is in the legislative language. It is in statute that it's annual, so that one would have to be, changed by amendment. But that it's something that I'm sure there may be others, but that's the one that comes up every year.
Okay, thank you. And Lee Towers is one who's working on that for us. Okay, I want to make sure everybody has an update. The NCHIMS team, we've been meeting with them on a regular basis. They're the consultants that are reviewing out of the legislative package for the settlement of the coalition case. So their work is ongoing, and each of you may have already heard from them or may have had meetings, and we're not part of that. We being MHEC, we're meeting individually with them and providing additional information in a very transparent manner, basically the same with everybody else. It's on our webpage, go to it, So anything else for the good of the cause? We just passed our hour mark, so I try to keep these pretty punctual. Yes, Dr. Yu?
I do have a question. I was thinking during the last agenda on the changes during this higher education. Have we covered the workplace change, like people don't want to come back to campus.
Emily, you want to take it that?
I'm sorry, Dr. Yu, are you talking about kind of just the return to campus in general and?
Right, for some faculty and staff members, nationally there's a problem. Locally, of course, we have some as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we can continue that conversation when we have the our health experts on the call on our Thursday call, which is not next week. I think the week after. So we can certainly bring that up for further discussion and get a better pulse of how locals and how the state are handling employee challenges and people returning to the office and how to deal with that.
Thank you.
No, that's good.
Yep.
Okay, anything else? Stay well, everyone. And again, thank you for your leadership. Bye-bye.